One of the jurors in the trial of Derek Chauvin has given an interview to CBS, and now we are getting a glimpse to the mindset of the jurors and why they said guilty on all counts. This juror was an alternate. So this means this individual, this woman, was not actually in the deliberations, did not actually say guilty. However, in the interview, she said she did feel Derek Chauvin was guilty. And it's actually rather fascinating and kind of sad, to be honest. Emotions rule the day. And I think this is obvious to most people who watch this. I'd be willing to surmise, I'd be willing to bet that many people who watch a channel like mine are more interested in logic and less interested in emotion. There's pros and there's cons to that kind of mentality, but I'm more interested in logic. Based on the facts in the case and not how I felt about them, I felt that perhaps there was an argument for manslaughter, but certainly not murder. And I think most people kind of fall into that position. Right now, the left is basically saying that people on the right and conservatives just think Chauvin was innocent. Well, you know what? Some do. I absolutely I think that's the case. In fact, there were many analysts who said the state did not prove their case. I was looking for any fact-based statement that said to me the state proved their case. And I'll tell you what I find scary about this. A few things. First and foremost, let me just preface this by saying I'm not a fan of agents of the state violently suppressing people, especially when it comes to like drug use and stuff. I understand there's nuance. I'm not speaking specifically about George Floyd. Not a big fan of the police system and the prison system in general. I'm for prison reform and police reform. I oppose private prison systems. Don't know what all the solutions might be. I'll just put it this way. It's easy to identify problems. It's hard to solve them. That's why I kind of slow roll everything. And I don't have strong opinions necessarily on policy issues. But what worries me is that we are seeing firsthand in a live stream trial how emotion is more important than fact. This juror basically said that she cried when she saw the video. You know, we had Charlie LaDuff on the IRL podcast the other day. Great dude. Everybody seemed to love him, but we did disagree on this point. He said the verdict was correct and this man was killed. And I'm just like, dude, you can't throw out the individual for what you have the state do. And we're not going to get reform at the state level if we allow this to placate us. Now, you got all these leftists claiming that the riots worked. And I'm like, honestly, I think it was in spite of the riots, to be completely honest. This woman actually said the protests weren't a consideration for her. She's an alternate juror. She's come out with her face and name and said, here's what I felt. And she felt Chauvin was guilty. She said, I just don't understand how it went from a counterfeit 20 to a death. It's like, were you listening to the trial? No, she was overcome with emotion. She was predisposed from the get-go. And I think there's going to be an appeal, and I think the appeal will succeed because Chauvin should have got a change of venue. He cannot get a fair trial in this place, and he didn't. This woman even said, we have this article from Law & Order, I was pretty uncomfortable. Alternate juror says Derek Chauvin stared her down in court. She said that there were several instances where she'd look up and see Chauvin looking at her, and she was uncomfortable. It's like, dude, why? If you have a predisposition against the defendant, well, you know what? Unfortunately, we're all human. Jury trials are human. Now, there's a couple other factors. I want to talk to you about what the juror said so we can get some insight into why they convicted this man. But we also have some news on what may come next, because it may be that Chauvin actually gets released on appeal. There are some people arguing he should be given bail until the sentencing. And there's something called a Blakely waiver, which could, my understanding is, reduce the amount of time he might actually serve. He essentially asked the judge to determine sentencing. So I'll read this for you. We'll break this down. But first, let's take a look at this juror from CBS this morning. Alternate juror talks about the Chauvin trial verdict and the testimony that really got to me. I will first point out, Tobin, he was the prosecution's witness. He nailed it. I even, in one of my segments where I talked about there was a big moment for the defense, the prosecutors did really, really well. And I opened up by saying the prosecution did really, really well. And a lot of legal analysts said that in that particular moment. There were many moments where I thought the prosecution dropped the ball and I was surprised. Well, I can't say I was surprised by the verdict. Honestly, I thought it would be like a week of deliberations. I thought he'd be guilty on some charges, not all 3 counts. But when the verdict came in like 10 hours after 10 hours of deliberations, I was like, this has got to be guilty on all charges, right? Because they got to be scared about riots. Here's the story. Lisa Christensen sat through every minute of the trial of Derek Chauvin as prosecutors and the defense each made their case in the killing of George Floyd. She was an alternate juror, so she did not have a role in the verdict. But in an exclusive interview for CBS this morning, she said she was happy with the jury's decision to convict Chauvin after weeks of hard testimony. Christensen said she was reluctant to be on the jury when she was first called up. Quote, I was worried about, whatever the verdict may be. If some people felt strongly on one side, other people felt strongly on the other side. So no matter what, I felt like somebody wasn't going to be happy. Let me just pause right there and say, in my opinion, that is, again, in my opinion, as close as we will get to her admitting the riots played a role. Now, hold on. Some might say, Tim, that's a bad opinion. She's played it down the middle. Are right-wingers going to go and burn down buildings and throw bricks through windows if Chauvin is found guilty? No, they didn't do it. The riots still came in Portland from the leftists. Now, what if she said not guilty? Let me make sure I phrase it properly. If he was found guilty, no one's worried about right-wingers going out and burning stuff down and breaking buildings. If Chauvin is found not guilty, then there is a fear that Antifa and the far left will go and destroy everything. So when she says, I'm worried about whatever the verdict may be, people feel strongly on one side. Sure, they both might be mad at you, but that's her acknowledgement. That's her acknowledgement about the results and the ramifications of her verdict. That's the social justice wager. Because the left is allowed to storm Capitol buildings in OKC, because they're allowed to riot and they get off with a slap on the wrist or charges being dropped, the wager is thus. It is safer to feign being a leftist than to admit being a right winger or to have conservative views. That's just the way it is. So I guess our lesson from all of this is the only effective form of resistance to the ongoing leftist insanity is to just feign being a leftist, but I guess make them look bad. I don't know. False flag activism or something. If a right winger goes out, a conservative, a Republican, or Trump supporter, and they protest, they're called rioters or insurgents or terrorists. It's called white supremacy. If the left goes out and literally sets a building on fire, it's called the voice of the language of the unheard. We know the jurors were worried about the ramifications. We also know one was heavier than the other. I think, to me, that's kind of an admission. That's just my opinion. They say she was known to the court as juror number 96, and even though she wasn't part of the deliberations, she came to a decision. I felt he was guilty. They read the jury instructions to us in the courtroom briefly, but I didn't know it was going to be guilty on all counts, but I would have said guilty, she said. Why did you think he was guilty? What led you to that belief? Yukas asked. I just felt like the prosecution made a really good, strong argument. Dr. Tobin was the one that really did it for me. He explained everything. I understood it down to where he said, this is the moment that he lost his life. Really got to me, she replied. I would like to point something out. Why I wasn't swayed. When the George Floyd, when the whole video it came out, I made several videos saying it was wrong of this cop. Don't care if you do this, cops must be held accountable. Most conservatives did too. I was very much on board with the cops overstepped their bounds on this one. Then evidence started to come out and I open-minded. I said, interesting. Well, let's see the argument. I watched the trial and I said, these cops don't know when someone loses life or has a seizure. They're not medical doctors. All they know is they have to subdue someone who's resisting. The prosecutor's own witness testified that they've subdued people until EMS arrived. So what was different in this case? The emotion, the fear. Remarkably, the leaked video tainted the jury. You had I should say it's circuitous. Probably it's better to say the leaked video that they claim. Oh, I'm sorry, not the leaked video. The video of the incident that was not all encompassing was used to show people, what happened to George Floyd. And they're saying, aha, see, without that video, we wouldn't have really known. But I don't view it that way. The way I see it is there was actually so much more footage we needed to get the full context. I don't like the idea of, violent agents of the state killing people. But in this instance, it was a criminal on drugs, a guy on drugs who broke the law, who was resisting arrest clearly and plainly. And the cops don't understand how to be a marksman, how to be a doctor. And that was an argument that I think maybe the defense kind of put that argument up. That we're not talking about the perspective of a doctor. Tobin had hundreds of hours to watch each and every detail and make a diagnosis. These are cops in the street surrounded with people screaming at him. I just don't see it. But the prosecution said, ignore everything and just trust how you felt and what you saw with your own eyes. Chauvin did this. It's insane. It's just not that simple. But you know what? Hey, at this point, police, y'all are on warning, okay? I hope you all realize it's astounding to me that there are actually people trying to join police departments after this. You are going to get the stupidest, most poorly trained officers when they start bringing in all of these new recruits with no experience, and they are very likely to go to prison. That's what I'm saying. You got to be really dumb to like go, I know, I'll join the police department in this city or whatever, or just be a cop in a major urban metro. I would like y'all to realize something. When cops have been in the job for a long time, 26 years, 10 years, 10 and a half, whatever, they have experience. However, some of them may grow callous, and we do need police accountability. But at least these guys have a general understanding of what they can and can't do. And maybe there are some changes that we need to see. This is kind of going over the top in my opinion, but we're all kind of upset over what happened in this incident for a variety of reasons. What happens when you have mass resignations? What happens when you have a bunch of cops going to prison? And then you're like, okay, we're going to add 100 new cops fresh out of the academy. We're going to make them do more because we have less police. So each one of these cops has to do more work. You're going to get more shootings. You're going to get more police brutality. You're going to get more cops going to prison. I love it. I love it. Any one of these cops that joins the department right now has in my opinion, a substantially high likelihood of going to prison because the left will demand it and they don't have the experience to deal with conflict or crisis the way a veteran cop does. So a young cop's going to get in. He's going to be like, oh no, this guy's scaring me. And he's going to, subdue a guy, break his arm or shoot him. And that person's going to go to prison. They're going to be like, he was only on the force for 3 months, inexperienced and scared. He was involved in a shooting and bye-bye. You go to prison. You chose to do it. Don't look at me. So let's read a little bit more. During the 13 days of sometimes tense and emotional testimony and cross-examination, both the prosecution and defense promised the jury that they were going to prove their case. But Christensen said only one side did. So who made an impact in the defense, good or bad? Yukas asked. I don't think they had a good impact, Christensen said in reference to Chauvin's defense team. I think that's a fair point. Many people pointed out the defense witness on use of force flubbed it bad, saying that subduing someone on the ground was not a use of force. That was a kick in the face to everybody who got emotional over that video. That was bad. Guy got tore up. Should have said it was a use of force. It was a lesser use of force than permitted. And it seemed like Chauvin was trying to reduce the amount of force on Floyd. Unfortunately, their witness didn't pull it off. And so that was bad. So that's why I think, look, a lot of people, I think, I do think the riots played a role, but I also think some of these people were leaning towards this. It's just the way it is, man. Let's read more. She says, I think he overpromised in the beginning and didn't live up to what he said he was going to do. The prosecution did have a witness that made an impact on Christensen. Darnella Fraser, the teen who filmed the video showing Chauvin pressing his knee into Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. That's also not true. The prosecution, their own witnesses said his knee wasn't consistently in the neck of George Floyd. People just don't know this stuff. And maybe because they're not paying attention, they just don't understand why people have different opinions on this. But I do find it interesting that she expected the defense to prove their case. He didn't have to. He just needed to provide some doubt. And that's it. The jury was not operating on that. They were like, what do I believe to be true? As opposed to, let me phrase it. They were like, what do I lean towards? As opposed to, it's always got to be the burden on the state. I'm surprised by this, but hey, it is what it is. Chauvin should have got a change of venue, in my opinion. He'll probably win an appeal. I really felt that she felt guilty for not doing more, and she feels responsible in a way, and I really feel bad for her. But I commend her on taking the video because without her, I don't think this would have been possible, Christensen said. You see this? This is bias. I think this is media framed bias. These are people who saw the news and got their information from a falsely framed media. So it is what it is. It was emotional. I think my eyes teared up a couple of times, so especially seeing it from different angles and things. Christensen said she locked eyes several times with Chauvin during the trial due to seating arrangements. She said she was pretty uncomfortable and got another impression of him as she watched the video. I felt like he was the leader, and the other officers were following his lead. I kind of felt like he wasn't taking the warning seriously. Obviously, kind of like I know what I'm doing. Maybe Chauvin should have testified on his own behalf. He didn't do it. It's his right not to do it. It shouldn't be held against him. But apparently the jurors wanted that. And I think many people did want that. And I think it would have done well for him. Now, I don't know what he talked about with his lawyer and they decided not to do it. I think he probably should have. It couldn't hurt. I mean, in my opinion, if politics was going to play a role, he was going to go to prison. So why not just testify? Why not say, this was the training that I was told? Definitively, I was not trying to hurt the man. I just wanted him to stop resisting so we can arrest him. He was large and Chauvin didn't do it. I think that really was incriminating in a lot of ways, but more importantly, the absence of a statement from Chauvin. Maybe the reality is Chauvin really was callous, that he really didn't care. Maybe we shouldn't infer anything from his lack of testimony, but I'll put it this way. It's not about whether or not he testified. I want to make sure that's clear. You have a right not to do so. I just don't know what he was thinking. I don't know if what the defense says is true. I personally don't think the prosecution has proved murder. I think they could have got him on second-degree murder, but third-degree murder, no. I think they could have said, felony assault on an individual. He died. That's murder 2. Murder 3, not so much. He was doing his job. He went overboard. But no, they got him on everything. Christensen said another alternate juror were excused after Judge Peter Cahill sent the jurors to deliberate. 2 days later, after more than 10 hours of deliberation, Chauvin was found guilty of unintentional second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in George Floyd's death. He faces decades in prison and will be sentenced by Judge Cahill in about 8 weeks. While the trial may be over, Christensen said it will have an impact on her for a while. I just don't understand how it got from a counterfeit $20 bill to a death. It kind of shocks me, she said. Christensen lives in Brooklyn Center, the city where Daunte Wright was shot by a police officer nearly 2 weeks ago. She said those protests did not play into her decision about Chauvin being guilty. Wright will be laid to rest Thursday. I honestly believe her. I do. The Daunte Wright protest probably didn't play a role because she's chosen to come forward with her name. Or maybe I really think, I think she was not swayed by it. I do. I do think it's fair to say, well, hold on. I got to preface that. I honestly don't know. She did say she understood the ramifications. She understood that people were going to be angry. I think that does play a role. But I don't think she's worried about the far left. She's put her face out there. Chauvin was found guilty. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the reason she's doing this interview is to save herself. Maybe she's still worried that the jurors will be attacked for simply being jurors. Maybe. So maybe she's like, I better get out in front of this and tell everyone he's guilty and I'm on their side. Maybe that's the reality. And that's why she's saying, I knew that there were real ramifications, that people were going to be mad no matter what. They're going to be mad no matter what. But your city was being tore up by the left, not the right. So I think I should, upon reflection, I mentioned it earlier in the video. I think that's as close as an admission we'll get, close to an admission as we'll get. In my opinion, I think she was scared. In my opinion, I think it played a role. I guess I should just say, I don't think it played the biggest role in the world. I think she was cognizant of that fact, but I think emotions, for the most part, played a role. Now, I'll just go over this a little bit. The Blakely sentencing. They say for legal insurrection, this is Andrew Branco, whose analysis has been fantastic in my opinion. Once an initial range is determined for sentencing, that range can be further reduced if there are mitigating factors, or alternatively increased above the initial range if there are aggravating factors known as Blakely factors. Blakely is an interesting case because it resulted in a profound revision of how sentencing guidelines are understood. Criminal offenses typically have a maximum sentence, say 40 years for second-degree felony murder, and the sentencing guideline suggests some fraction if the person has no prior convictions. The traditional practice has long been that a judge could consider a variety of mitigating and aggravating factors in order to in ordering a shorter or longer sentence than the guidelines suggested, and that this consideration was entirely the decision of the sentencing judge, so long as the sentence ordered did not exceed the maximum statutory sentence for the particular offense. So in the context of our second-degree felony murder conviction, a jury of the defendant's peers had found him guilty of that crime, punishable by up to 40 years, and now it was within the discretion of the sentencing judge to start sentencing considerations using the recommended sentence suggested by the guidelines, and then adjusting upward or downward based on his own discretion with no further involvement by a jury. The only time further involvement of a jury would be required then would be if the judge wished to exceed the statutory maximum sentence for the crime for which the defendant had been convicted. They say Blakely, this is how sentencing departures typically worked. Yada, yada. Under Blakely, the judge still needs to involve a jury if he wanted to sentence beyond the maximum for a crime in which there was a convict. But Blakely also held that a judge needed to involve a jury if he wanted to sentence a convict beyond the range suggested by guidelines. So I guess the idea here is Chauvin signed a Blakely waiver. I guess he wants the judge to make his own decisions. They say immediately after yesterday's readings of the guilty verdicts, Cahill informed the parties that they would have 1 week to file arguments on Blakely factors in the case. Okay. They say he could be facing a maximum for 40. He could get 10 to 5. There's also 25. We'll see if this runs concurrent. I'm not entirely sure. It could be interesting. I think they're going to throw the book at him. I think they're going to give him the harshest possible penalties. And I think this bodes terribly for Kyle Rittenhouse. I said Kyle Rittenhouse is going to get life. I mean that hyperbolically. I don't know exactly what he's going to get. I'm saying he's going to get a very, very extreme sentence. He's going to get the maximum possible probably because they're going to burn everything down unless they get what they want. They admit it freely and openly. This is how it works these days. That's why I said it's the social justice wager. If you are a right winger and the left wins, you're burned at the stake. If you're a right winger and the right wins, you're fine. If you're a left winger and the right wins, you're fine. But if you're a left winger and you know the left wins, you're still fine. So in that wager, it's only the right that gets punished. The left will be fine no matter what because the right isn't going to retaliate against the left if the right gains power over cultural institutions. That's how it goes. Well, the ramifications against police are pretty severe. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.